Adam was not the first man. That sentence sounds like an attack on Genesis, but the controversy begins inside Genesis itself. In Genesis chapter 1, before Adam is ever named, God creates humankind, male and female, blesses them, and commands them to fill the earth. Then Genesis chapter 2 appears to begin again. The ground is dry. No cultivated plants have grown. There is no man to work the soil. And only then does God form Adam from the dust and breathe life into him. Most churches teach that these are two views of the same creation. Genesis 1 is the wide view. Genesis 2 is the close view. That may be correct, but a second reading has haunted interpreters for generations. What if Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are not describing the same human event? What if the people created male and female in chapter 1 belonged to an earlier world, while Adam was formed later as the first man of a new sacred order? If that reading is right, Adam was not the beginning of biological humanity. He was a restart after something had already gone terribly wrong. And the first clue is hiding in a difference so familiar that almost everyone reads past it. Genesis 1 says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Then the text says God created the human in his image. Male and female he created them. God blesses them. God tells them to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and rule over its living creatures. There is no garden, no rib, no forbidden fruit, no serpent, no personal name Adam. The Hebrew word is Adam, but here it can function collectively. It can mean humanity, humankind, or the human creature. The text speaks about male and female together as a created population. Then Genesis 2 changes the scale. The story moves to a specific region, a specific garden, a specific river system, and a specific man formed from the dust. God breathes into his nostrils. God plants Eden. God gives him a command. God brings the animals before him. Then the woman is built from his side. One chapter presents humanity as male and female together. The next presents one man first, then one woman. One chapter ends with every plant already given for food. The next begins by saying no shrub of the field has yet appeared, and no cultivated plant has yet sprung up. One chapter is cosmic, the other is intimate. Are these two cameras filming one event, or are they two different beginnings? That is the real question behind the claim that Adam was not the first man. And before we decide, we need to examine what Genesis actually says, what it does not say, and which popular arguments collapse the moment the Hebrew is checked. Because one famous argument for a world before Adam is much weaker than people think. Another is far stronger than most people realize. And the strongest objection appears to destroy the entire theory, until one disturbing distinction is considered. Begin with the opening 2 verses. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. For most readers, this is a continuous sequence. God creates the universe. The earth begins unformed and empty. Then God orders it over 6 days. But the pre-Adamic reading places an enormous interval between the first and second verses. Genesis 1:1 describes an original creation. Genesis 1:2 describes that creation after catastrophe. In that reading, the earth did not begin ruined. It became ruined. The entire argument seems to turn on one small Hebrew verb, hayah. Most English Bibles translate it as was. The earth was without form and void, but hayah can also express becoming in some contexts. Lot's wife became a pillar of salt. A man can become a living being. Something can enter a new condition. So gap theory teachers have translated the verse this way: the earth became without form and void. That single change creates room for an older world, a rebellion, a judgment, and a second ordering of the earth. But here is where honesty matters. The verb hayah does not automatically mean became. Context determines its force. Hebrew grammarians commonly read Genesis 1:2 as a description of the earth's initial state, not a later transformation. The grammar does not force a catastrophe between the verses. So if someone tells you that one Hebrew word proves a destroyed civilization before Adam, they are claiming more than the word can carry. The theory cannot stand on hayah alone. The same is true of the word replenish in older English Bibles. Genesis 1:28 tells humanity to replenish the earth. Some argue that replenish means to fill again, proving that an earlier population had disappeared. But the underlying Hebrew verb means to fill. In older English, replenish could simply mean fill, not necessarily refill. The same command is given to Noah after the flood, but the word itself does not prove a previous civilization in Genesis 1. That argument sounds dramatic. It is not the strongest evidence. The stronger clue is the condition described by 2 Hebrew words, tohu va-bohu, without form and void. These words describe emptiness, desolation, disorder, and an uninhabitable condition. They appear together in only a tiny number of biblical passages, and when the phrase reappears in Jeremiah, it does not describe a world waiting peacefully to be built. It describes a world after judgment. Jeremiah says, "I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light." Then the prophet looks again. The mountains tremble, the birds have fled, the fruitful land has become wilderness, cities lie broken before the fierce anger of the Lord. Jeremiah is deliberately using the language of Genesis 1:2 to portray creation reversed by catastrophe. Light disappears, order collapses, inhabitants vanish, cities fall, the world returns to tohu va-bohu. This does not prove that Genesis 1:2 records the ruins of a pre-Adamic civilization. Jeremiah may simply be borrowing creation language to describe the devastation of Judah, but it proves something important. Biblical writers could use the exact condition of Genesis 1:2 as the image of a world after judgment. That makes the ancient question legitimate. Was Genesis 1:2 the first unformed stage of creation? Or was it the aftermath of a judgment so complete that light, order, inhabitants, and cities disappeared? Isaiah adds another piece. Isaiah 45 says God did not create the earth tohu. He formed it to be inhabited. Supporters of the gap theory hear a contradiction. If God did not create the earth desolate, why is it desolate in Genesis 1:2? Their answer is that something happened between creation and desolation. The standard answer is different. Isaiah is speaking about God's purpose and finished work. God did not create the earth to remain empty. He formed it to be inhabited. There is no contradiction if Genesis 1:2 describes an unfinished stage moving toward habitation. Both readings can explain the verse, but only one of them requires a lost world. And that lost world becomes more imaginable when another biblical scene is placed before Genesis 1. In the book of Job, God asks Job where he was when the foundations of the earth were laid. God says the morning stars sang together, and the sons of God shouted for joy. Whatever precise beings the poetry describes, the scene places a heavenly assembly at the founding of the earth. Adam was not there. The angels were. The spiritual world is older than human history. That fact is not controversial inside the biblical story. The controversy is what happened among those beings before the serpent entered Eden. Genesis never explains the serpent's origin. It does not tell us when evil first entered creation. By the time Adam and Eve received their command, a hostile intelligence already exists. The tempter is already in the garden. The rebellion has already begun somewhere. So where is that missing war? Later biblical passages give fragments, but none offers a simple timeline. Isaiah 14 speaks against the king of Babylon and compares his fall to a shining one brought down from heaven after declaring that he would ascend and exalt his throne. Ezekiel 28 speaks against the ruler of Tyre, then uses imagery of an anointed cherub in Eden, perfect until iniquity was found in him. Revelation 12 presents war in heaven, with the dragon and his angels cast down. Christians have long connected these passages to Satan's rebellion, but their immediate historical targets are earthly kings, and the timing of Revelation's war is debated. These texts reveal a pattern of pride, rebellion, expulsion, and judgment. They do not place a date between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Still, the gap theory connects the fragments into one sequence. God creates the heavens and the earth. A heavenly ruler rebels. The rebellion contaminates an earlier world. Judgment reduces that world to darkness and desolation. Then the Spirit moves over the deep. Light returns. The earth is ordered again, and Adam is placed in a guarded sanctuary as the beginning of a new administration. Notice what this theory does. It does not merely insert dinosaurs between two verses. It turns Genesis 1 into a restoration after war. It turns Eden into a fortified sacred place in hostile territory. And it turns Adam from the first biological creature who looked human into the first priest-king of a restarted world. That is why the question matters. The theory changes the entire emotional shape of Genesis. Adam is no longer waking up in an innocent, empty world. He is waking up on a battlefield after the previous kingdom has fallen. The garden is not merely a beautiful home. It is holy ground planted inside a world where an enemy already moves. The command to keep the garden becomes even more important. The Hebrew verbs used for Adam's task can mean to serve and to guard. Similar language later appears in priestly service around sacred space. Guard it from what? If the entire creation were secure, why would the sanctuary require guarding? The standard answer is that Adam's role included obedience and protection against the serpent who soon appeared. The pre-Adamic answer goes further. Adam was installed after an older rebellion and was expected to hold ground that had already been lost once. He failed at the same point as the heavenly rebel before him. He reached for unauthorized elevation. He lost his appointed place. He was driven from sacred territory. And guardians were stationed at the entrance. The pattern repeats. This is where many viewers rush toward ruin ruins, fossils, pyramids, or legends of vanished giants. But we need to separate visual echoes from evidence. No archaeological discovery has proven a biblical civilization before Adam. Ancient stone structures were built by human cultures within history. Fossils do not carry labels saying they belong to a race judged between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, and the age of the earth cannot by itself prove this theological reading. The theory rises or falls first on the text, not on mysterious photographs. That does not make the ancient parallels worthless. It simply changes what they can honestly do. Many cultures remembered ages before the present human order. Mesopotamian king lists place extraordinary rulers before a great flood. Greek traditions speak of divine generations, titans, and successive ages of humanity. Egyptian traditions remembered divine rulers before human kings. Across the ancient world, civilization was often imagined as a later layer built upon older sacred or catastrophic ages. These traditions do not prove Genesis. They disagree with one another in major ways, but they show that the idea of an earlier world was not invented by modern internet speculation. Ancient people repeatedly imagined history as a sequence of worlds, rebellions, floods, and restarts. Genesis does something different with that memory. It removes the wars of competing creator gods. One God speaks, creation obeys. Chaos is not a rival deity. The deep is not God's equal. Light appears by command. But Genesis still opens over darkness, an abyss, and an earth described with words later used for judgment. That is why the opening remains so unsettling. The text is simple enough for a child to hear, and deep enough to sustain a dispute for centuries. If you value investigations that show the evidence and the objections instead of hiding whichever side is inconvenient, subscribe to the Buried Testament. The most important part of this case is still ahead, because so far we have only asked whether a world existed before Adam. Now we have to confront the verses that appear to say Adam absolutely was the first man, and one of them uses those exact words. 1 Corinthians 15 calls Adam the first man. Paul writes that the first man, Adam, became a living soul, while the last Adam became a life-giving spirit. He says the first man was of the earth, made of dust, while the second man is the Lord from heaven. That seems decisive. If Paul calls Adam the first man, how can anyone claim he was not? Romans 5 increases the pressure. Paul says sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin. Adam stands at the head of fallen humanity. Christ stands at the head of redeemed humanity. This creates a problem even larger than the words first man. If an inhabited world existed before Adam and was destroyed, then death existed before Adam's sin. Would that make Paul wrong? The answer depends on what kind of death Paul is describing and what kind of being supposedly lived before Adam. Some pre-Adamic interpreters argue that Romans 5 concerns death within Adam's human line. Adam's rebellion brings condemnation, alienation from God, and mortality to the humanity he represents. Creatures outside that covenant order could have lived and died without sharing Adam's spiritual status. Others argue that the earlier world was not populated by biological humans at all. It was an angelic administration, a civilization of spiritual powers, or an order of creatures fundamentally different from Adam. Its destruction would not contradict Paul, because Paul is tracing sin and death through Adamic humanity. Critics answer that this distinction is being invented to rescue the theory. Romans 5 does not mention a separate race. 1 Corinthians connects resurrection to the death that came through man. If human beings lived and died before Adam, the clean contrast between Adam and Christ becomes harder to explain. This is one reason the pre-Adamic theory became attractive in the modern period. It appeared to create space for an ancient earth, fossils, extinction, and geological catastrophe without moving Adam deep into prehistory. The ages of the rocks could be placed in the silence between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, but solving one problem creates another. If those ages contain suffering and death, what relationship do they have to the fall? If the answer is an earlier angelic rebellion, then Adam's sin was not the first corruption of creation. If the answer is natural animal death before Adam, then Romans 5 must be read as human, or covenant death, rather than the beginning of every biological death. If the answer is that no death existed before Adam, then the fossils and ruins cannot be placed in the gap as evidence. Every version pays a theological price. That is why this is not a harmless timeline puzzle. The identity of the first man affects the identity of the fall, the meaning of death, and the reason Christ is called the last Adam, and it explains why many churches do not teach the pre-Adamic reading. Silence does not automatically prove suppression. Often the theory is avoided because it requires several conclusions the text text never states directly, and because it complicates doctrines built on Adam as humanity's first father. The dispute is not simply between brave truth-seekers and frightened institutions. It is a dispute over which reading explains all the verses with the fewest unsupported assumptions. Genesis 5 also joins the creation accounts. It says that in the day God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, blessed them, and called their name Adam. That passage reaches back to Genesis 1 and connects the male and female creation to Adam's genealogy. This is the strongest case against two separate human creations. Genesis 1 and 2 use different scale and order because chapter 2 is not a second chronological event. It is a focused retelling of the sixth day. Genesis 5 confirms the connection. Paul confirms Adam as the first man and the entrance point of sin and death. Any pre-Adamic theory that ignores these passages is not an investigation. It is advertising. So is the case closed? For most interpreters, yes. But supporters of a pre-Adamic world make one final distinction. They argue that first man can describe covenant status, not merely biological sequence. Adam would be the first man of the human order represented in Scripture, the first bearer of a specific divine covenant, the first priestly ruler in Eden, the first federal head whose act determines the condition of his descendants. In that framework, beings could have existed before Adam without belonging to Adamic humanity as the Bible defines it. They might have looked human, but lacked Adam's calling. They might have belonged to a previous order already judged. They might have died biologically without sharing the spiritual death Paul connects to Adam. Or the earlier world might have been entirely angelic, with no biological humans at all. This distinction allows the theory to preserve Paul's theology while still placing life, intelligence, or civilization before Adam. But it comes with a cost. The Bible never plainly says there were biological humans before Adam who were outside his covenant. That conclusion is constructed from gaps, patterns, and distinctions. It is possible within certain theological systems. It is not an explicit verse, and this is where the title of this video becomes more than a sensational sentence. Was Adam the first biological human? Was he the first covenant man? Was he the first image-bearing ruler? Was he the first man of a restored earth? The word first may be doing more theological work than a modern reader assumes. Paul's comparison is not mainly about anthropology. It is about two representatives. Adam brings death. Christ brings resurrection. Adam is the head of the old humanity. Christ is the head of the new humanity. Calling Christ the second or last Adam does not mean he was literally the second male person ever born. It identifies him as the head of a new order. Pre-Adamic interpreters argue that the same representative logic shapes the phrase, first man. Critics answer that this is unnecessary. Paul can speak representatively precisely because Adam was also the first human ancestor. Both sides agree that Adam is unique. They disagree about what kind of uniqueness Genesis is claiming. Then there is the mystery of people outside Eden. After Cain kills Abel, he fears that whoever finds him will kill him. He leaves for the land of Nod. He builds a city. These details have often been used to argue that other populations already existed, but Genesis later says Adam had other sons and daughters. A compressed genealogy can contain many unnamed people and many years. Cain's fear and city do not require a separate race. The passage raises questions. It does not prove pre-Adamites. The same caution applies to Genesis 6. The sons of God take the daughters of men. The Nephilim appear. Mighty men of old enter the story. The earth becomes corrupt and filled with violence. Then the flood comes. This is not evidence that Adam was preceded by humans. Genesis 6 takes place generations after Adam, but it reveals a pattern that matters to the larger theory. The biblical world allows boundaries between heaven and earth to be violated. It remembers supernatural rebellion affecting human history. It presents divine judgment not as random destruction, but as a response to corruption that has spread through an entire world. The Book of Enoch expands that pattern. It describes watchers descending, taking wives, producing giants, teaching forbidden arts, and bringing violence upon the earth. Enoch is not part of every biblical canon, and it should not be used to rewrite Genesis. But it shows how ancient Jewish readers imagined the catastrophe behind Genesis 6. For those readers, human history unfolded inside an older war. Adam was not the first intelligent being. The serpent was older. The watchers were older. The conflict was older. Humanity entered a story that had already begun. That much is clear whether or not biological people existed before Adam, and perhaps that is the deepest truth hidden inside the debate. The Bible never presents Adam as the first conscious creature in an empty universe. It presents him as a newly formed man placed into a world containing ancient powers, sacred boundaries, and an enemy whose rebellion is never fully narrated in Genesis. Adam may have been the first biological man, but he was not the first actor on the stage. He arrived after the sons of God had celebrated creation. He arrived after evil had entered the will of a spiritual being. He arrived after the conflict that would reach his garden had already begun. This gives the title a second meaning. Adam was not the first man in the controversial pre-Adamic reading, but even in the traditional reading, Adam was not the beginning of the story. He inherited a cosmic conflict he did not create. The serpent understood the stakes before Adam understood the garden. The enemy knew what the image of God meant. The human pair did not. Why would the adversary target them immediately? Because Genesis 1 gives humanity a position connected to rule. God creates humankind in his image and tells them to exercise dominion over the earth. In the ancient world, an image represented the authority of a king. To bear God's image is not merely to possess intelligence or emotion. It is to represent divine rule inside creation. Humanity receives a commission. That commission threatens every rebel power that wants the earth for itself. So the serpent does not merely tempt two naive people to eat fruit. It sabotages the installation of God's representatives. The fall becomes an act of political and spiritual capture. The rulers surrender their trust. The sanctuary is lost. The ground is cursed. Exile begins. And history outside Eden becomes a struggle over who will rule the earth. Cain builds a city. Violence spreads. The sons of God cross a forbidden boundary. The flood resets the human world. Babel concentrates power and reaches toward heaven. Nations are scattered. Abraham is called. Israel is formed. The Messiah comes as the true image and obedient Adam. The last book of the Bible returns to a garden city where the tree of life stands again. The Bible is a story of creation, rebellion, exile, and restoration. The pre-Adamic theory asks whether that pattern occurred once before Genesis 1:2. That is why it refuses to disappear. It sees the Bible's repeated pattern and projects it backward into the darkness over the deep. A world, a rebellion, a judgment, a restoration, a new representative, then another rebellion, another judgment, and the promise of a final restoration that cannot be corrupted again. Is that projection justified? The evidence is suggestive, not conclusive. Genesis 1:2 can describe an unfinished earth without requiring destruction. Hayah does not prove became. Replenish does not prove fill again. Genesis 5 connects male and female creation with Adam. Paul calls Adam the first man. Those are serious reasons to keep the traditional reading. But Jeremiah proves that tohu va-bohu can describe a world after judgment. Job proves heavenly beings existed when the earth was founded. Genesis proves the serpent's rebellion predates the human fall. And the differences between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are real enough to demand explanation. Those are serious reasons the alternative reading continues to provoke debate. So what does Genesis 1 really say? It says God created Adam, humankind, in his image. It says this humanity was male and female. It says they received blessing, fruitfulness, and dominion. It does not name the individual Adam in that scene. It does not describe Eden there. It does not explain the origin of the serpent. It does not tell us whether the darkness over the deep was merely unfinished creation or the scar of an earlier judgment. Genesis 2 then forms the man from dust, gives him sacred breath, places him in a garden, and binds him to a command. The traditional reading says chapter 2 identifies the man already created in chapter 1. The pre-Adamic reading says chapter 2 introduces a new man after the first human order. The text gives enough unity to support the traditional reading. It gives enough tension to explain why the second reading exists, and it leaves one fact beyond dispute. Adam entered a world with a past. Whether that past contained angels alone, a ruined civilization, an earlier humanity, or only the unrecorded rebellion of the serpent, Adam did not begin the cosmic story. He was placed in the middle of it. The most dangerous mistake is not choosing the wrong side of the gap theory. It is imagining that Eden was a simple children's garden and that Adam's decision affected only two people standing beside a tree. Genesis presents something larger. The image of God was placed on earth. A hostile power challenged it. Human rule was captured. Death entered Adam's line. And the rest of Scripture records God's campaign to restore what was lost. Now the question belongs to you. Do Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 describe one human creation from two perspectives? Or does Genesis preserve the memory of two human orders with Adam beginning the second? Comment one word, one or two. Not because a vote settles Scripture, but because the reasons people give reveal where the real tension lies. And subscribe to the Buried Testament, because the next investigation follows the beings who were already present before Adam opened his eyes. The sons of God who shouted when the foundations of the earth were laid, and the rebellion Genesis never pauses to explain.